inclusionary zoning?
Good morning. One thing that always frustrated me going to conferences when I worked for a little nonprofit and hearing how amazing everybody else's programs were, I just came back really depressed. And it's like, why don't they ever talk about when things don't go well? Because I really want to hear that, because that's my experience. Things often don't go well. So I was bragging about this project, Troy Garnett's. Now I'm going to talk to you about something that turned out really badly that I put years of time into. It wasn't my fault that it turned out badly, but I had to re-experience all the trauma all over again preparing for this workshop. So, but I did it for you. All right, so we're going to talk about key concepts of inclusionary zoning, and then I'm going to talk about a case study in Madison, Wisconsin. And actually, I'm going to be talking about what was good, what didn't work, and there's a lot of lessons embedded in that. And then discuss implications for Iowa City. And one thing about inclusionary zoning is that you could implement it altogether, or you could just pull out concepts and apply that. And the same with Troy Gardens. If there's a couple of elements you like, grab those, don't feel like you have to do the whole thing. All right, so what is inclusionary zoning? It's local policies that either require or encourage lower priced income targeted homes and apartments in new market rate developments. And this is a graphic from Cornerstone that shows over 500 inclusionary zoning ordinances in effect around the US. And as you can see, California is the place that has by far the highest concentration of them, as you might expect given their housing prices. So you have two options. There's mandatory, which is where you have to do it, and that typically produces more units and more affordable units. And then voluntary, you need to offer attractive incentives to induce participation, because people can take it or leave it. So incentives are really the key to the whole deal, whether it's voluntary or mandatory. What are the incentives that are going to cover the cost of providing these affordable units? All right, so the different types is, most typical is density bonus. Talk about that in a minute. Other zoning variances, reductions in fees, or it could be tax abatement, direct financial subsidies, and then fast tracking the process. So we're going to talk about those. So in California, this is a cool graphic, also from Cornerstone, that shows the percentage breakdown of the different types of incentives offered. And as you can see, there you go. Density bonus is by far the most commonly offered incentive, where 90% of the jurisdictions that have inclusionary zoning offer that as an incentive. Then behind that, you have fast track processing, which is also called expedited process. And then you've got direct subsidies and waiver of fees, and then maybe some design flexibility. All right, but it's really density bonus is a key one. All right, so here's the deal. In exchange for including affordable housing units, whether this is condo or apartment, you can have more density in your project. All right, more units, more verticality, more floors. And that could be increases of either somewhere between 10 and 300%. Okay, and here's an example from Charlotte, North Carolina. So on the left, you can see a subdivision with 28 total units. They look like they're all single-family lots. All right, but because on the right, where they're including affordability, they're actually able to increase their density from 3 dwelling units an acre to 5.3 dwelling units an acre. And so those additional units or additional density that they get, half needs to be affordable. All right, so they're able to go quite a bit more dense within the same acreage in exchange for providing affordability. You'll notice the open space is not diminished, so that did not get bargained away. But the lot sizes are smaller, and I think they're allowing a little multifamily in there. All right, so that's a density bonus in a kind of more of a conventional subdivision situation. You can also reduce parking requirements, and this is going to be for multifamily, multi-story buildings. This is an example from Tucson, where they reduced the off-street parking requirement by 20%, and that had a big impact on the profitability of the project. All right. And particularly where you've got good public transportation options, where you have good walkability or bikeability, parking ratio reductions can be a really good thing. You could also reduce fees, which is a really, this is a common sense. So essentially, there's a $1,000 discount in fees. And in the example in Santa Fe, that ended up moving profitability from 6.6% to 7%. So when you're looking at these incentives, you want to financially model them to really get a sense of what the financial impact is. So if you're saying, yes, we would like you to do 10% of your units need to be affordable to folks at this income range with a maximum rental price of this amount, you need to be able to point to a set of incentives and show that the numbers work. Now you might ask, so of course you did that financial modeling in Madison when you designed your ordinance, didn't you? And the answer is no. All right. Financial subsidy is the big one. And developers, as you know, are always looking for money for every single project. And it seems like the fancier the project, the more subsidy they want. At least that's the way it works in Madison. And so there's no magic sources of money. So in terms of direct subsidy for affordable units in an inclusionary housing context, the bit we've heard already about the low-income housing tax credit, there's CDBG funds, there's home funds, there's other local sources. And one source of funding, which I'll talk about a bit, is that for folks who qualify for a waiver from having to provide inclusionary units, there's a requirement that they pay into a fund as an alternative to providing the units, and then that fund provides a source of money that can be accessed for these projects as well. And then tax abatement is another approach where you reduce taxes on projects in order to incentivize affordable units. In many states, this is barred by statute. And Wisconsin is one of them. One of the concerns is that that can erode the property tax base for schools. So I'm not saying that these prohibitions are a bad thing. There's reasons for them. And I don't know if tax abatement is allowed in Iowa or not. You would know. And then the big promise with a lot of these inclusionary zoning ordinances is that we'll move you to the front of the line if you provide affordable units. And if that really happens, and sometimes that's a false promise, but if it really happens, and you can shave months off the development process, that saves significant dollars, because when you're doing development work, you're doing it on borrowed money, and you have that interest expense every month. So, if you can reduce 4 months, all right, from 36 months to 32 months on a project, you can increase your profitability, all right? So these incentives, it's just really important to figure out what is the real world financial impact of these. Because otherwise you're just asking developers to do affordability out of their own pocket, which is okay, by the way, but you need to be honest if that's what you're asking for. All right, so what does it all add up to? All right, so let's just combine subsidies for parking, ratio reductions, fee waivers, and expedited review. All right, so for a sample project, the profitability was 6.6%. They needed to get to 10% to do the deal, and now they're 10.4. Okay, so I'm not going to get deep into the numbers, but basically, when you're looking at this kind of stuff, you want to make sure that these incentives add up with sufficient amount of savings in order to make the profit sufficient, the project sufficiently profitable, right? Then we'll talk about Madison. Or as I say, our pain is your gain. Learning from the inclusionary housing experience in Madison, Wisconsin. There's a lot of talk about best practices. You always want to follow best practices. We always want to be aware of worst practices. There's a lot that can be learned there. So first, let's just set a little context. First, I just want to see where median housing prices were at. So you folks are a bit lower than us. We're at 210 right now, and you're at 191. As you can see, we have this similar jump where you go from 2-bedroom to 3-bedroom homes. We jump 55,000, you jump 38,000, and then there's another big jump from 3 to 4-bedroom. So, you know, the larger your family, the worse the affordability gets. when it comes to owner-occupied housing. And again, my focus here is on owner-occupied housing. At this point, rental housing is probably the greater need. This is just my area of familiarity. What's interesting is that the average listing price in Iowa City is actually higher. So I think we probably list stuff more at what we expect to sell it for, and you guys list optimistically and get less. All right. So remember this guy from the movie this morning? This is Mayor Dave. He's not our mayor anymore. He had nothing to do with Troy Gardens, but he was happy to be interviewed for the film. Mayor Dave was elected in 2002 on an affordable housing platform that was actually developed by another candidate. I like Dave a lot. When he won, he said, I'm delivering inclusionary zoning. That was the whole focal point of his campaign, and that's why he won the election. So he had to deliver on the promise. He convened a blue ribbon advisory panel, of which I was invited. And because Mayor Dave came from a nonprofit background, he loaded it up with nonprofit developers and advocates. He did not load it up with for-profit developers or architects. And that was a big mistake. There are for-profit developers who would have come in a spirit of collaboration, and he did not include them, and I think that decision right there may have doomed ordinance. And so best practice is if you're developing an ordinance, you want to get a good range of folks around the table. You want people there who have good intentions. You don't want people there who are trying to thwart the project. That was an error. I spoke up about that, other folks did as well, and that was a mistake. So, mistakes were made, but not by me. We didn't do any financial modeling of the incentives, and I kept asking, I said, let's get a pro forma from a developer and let's see how this models out. No, we don't trust their numbers. Okay, so we won't look at any numbers then. So that made me mad, and that was foolish. We didn't hire an external consultant because we are so smart at Madison that we don't need to hire anybody else to help us. And I went out and found the guy in the whole country who could come in and work for cheap. And city staff did not want to be involved in it. And that was a mistake. And I ended up being the researcher on the committee, and I found a great ordinance in Burlington and a pretty good ordinance in Burlington, and I mean in Boulder, and there's some stuff we could learn from San Francisco. I pulled stuff together, and then what happened is stuff just got picked from different ones and cobbled together in a piecemeal fashion. And then other stuff we just made up. All right? This is not how you're supposed to do it, people. And then we had this political process. It was contentious from the start. There was an inability to forge consensus. For-profit developers bear some responsibility. They were actively trying to thwart this ordinance as it moved forward. And then, once the ordinance was introduced to the city council, the mayor's office allowed key elements to be bargained away without any real awareness of the impact it had on the workability of the ordinance. So really, by the time the ordinance was adopted, it was a mess. And the results were entirely predictable. Saying, I told you so, is not all it's cracked up to be. So first thing that disappeared was the rental housing component. Because apparently, it was in conflict with the state anti-rent control statute. Well, we could have moved forward with the voluntary rental ordinance, but we chose not to for some reason I do not understand. So at the time, and this was 2004, there was not a lot of activity on the rental side, so really folks didn't pay a whole lot of attention to this. Now it's flipped. Almost all the development activity in Madison's on the rental side. Owner-occupied housing, how we won the battle but lost the war. All right, so in 2014, any new development with 10 or more units, or which requires a new zoning map amendment, like a PUD, has to provide at least 15% of the units to be affordable. All right, that sounds good. 15% have to be affordable in new projects of 10 or more units. I like that. All right, and if you're doing a for-profit developer and all your housing is affordable to folks at 80% or below, you don't have to do anything. So they're encouraging the market. This isn't written in a way to encourage the market to do the right thing. And then the less affordable your project is, the higher the percentage of affordable units you need to provide. You know, I kind of like that. There's, you know, there's some logic to that. And the deeper your affordability is, the fewer number of units you need to provide. That makes sense because it's more expensive per unit. So if your units are affordable to folks at 60% of median income, you only have to make 10% of your units affordable. But if they're at 75% of median income, you have to do 15%. All right? Deeper affordability means fewer units. That makes sense. So far, so good. Available non-cash incentives. The incentive matrix. Now, city staff is getting involved writing up the protocols and procedures. Okay, and this is where the complexity starts coming in. You can get a density bonus that varies by project. You can get a parkland development fee reduction, because anytime you're doing new development, you pay park fees because new parks need to be built to accommodate the new housing. They're allowing for off-street parking reductions of up to 25%. Right? Non-city provision of street tree planting means you can plant your own trees instead of the city having to plant them in the area between the sidewalk and the curb. You could go one additional story in the downtown. You can set something up so for that particular street it requires a residential parking permit so that the folks who live there are prioritized for parking. And then if there needs to be a neighborhood plan developed for that project where one doesn't exist, the city will provide assistance. So this all sounds fine, right? Now, cash subsidy. You can get up to $10,000 per unit in grant money for half of the affordable units you're going to provide. And then for the other half, you can get up to $5,000 if there's 49 or, it's starting to get complicated now, right? But it's a loan. So you can get $5,000 for some of your affordable units, but you have to pay it back at some point. In exchange, developers need to make sure that the outside of affordable units look the same as the market rate, that the mix of attached and detached between affordable and market rate is the same, the bedroom mixes of affordable and market rate are the same, affordable units are dispersed throughout the project and not just all concentrated in the back by the dumpster, which happens. You have to phase them so they all come online at the same time. So if your project's done in 3 phases, you need to have 10% affordable in each one of the phases. Your rental and sale prices need to meet the ordinance standards. You need to offer security in the form of a deed restriction, and the city needs to have an option to purchase if they're ownership units. All right, well that's not so bad, but something's not right. Some of these incentives were new. You know that density bonus, which is the big one? The big incentive you get for inclusionary zoning, guess what? We haven't given that away for free forever. So now we're saying, oh, you get a density bonus in exchange for affordable units. And developers are saying, well, wait, you already were giving us that. So it's nothing new. It doesn't help us fund these units. So essentially what the city was saying is that the way we used to do business, we're reframing it as a new set of incentives. The developers were saying, it's not new money, this doesn't help us. And they were right. These weren't new incentives. And then the city never did the financial modeling, so we never really knew if the incentives were sufficient to cover the cost of compliance. In San Francisco, which is a better practice, their ordinance is designed so that it's cost neutral for developers to do inclusionary units. That was their goal. You could have a different goal, but that was their goal, and that's how they designed their ordinance. So, because of the way we've set this up, every developer out there is asking for a waiver, right? Which is also a standard feature of IC ordinances, all right? And it's up to our plan commission to make the determination whether a project qualifies for a waiver. If you do qualify for a waiver, you have to pay into this Affordable Housing Trust Fund in an amount equal to 10% of the average sale price of the owner-occupied units that you should have provided that were affordable. Right, that kind of makes sense. All right, so what are the situations where you would qualify for a waiver? First one, if your PITI plus your condo dues exceed the affordability limits for these inclusionary units, you don't have to provide them. Exactly. All right, so they're saying if your condo dues are too high, you can get a waiver. Right? So it's like, what? All right? It could be that you have a project where your development costs are extraordinarily high and it simply doesn't make sense to provide those inclusionary units on site. And this one is a legitimate one. If you're doing some upscale high-rise project, is it better to do 10 units there or use that same money and do 20 units somewhere else? That one I think is legitimate. Okay, now you can get a waiver if the cost to provide the units exceeds the value of the incentives. It's like, wait, shouldn't you have figured that out a little earlier, right? This is the one that made me really mad. And the answer is, the incentives never covered the cost of compliance. So who's not going to ask for a waiver? Here's my favorite one, because I don't know what it means. This is the fourth one, and I read this 20 times. I still don't understand it, and that is a worst practice, because if I don't understand what one of these things means, it means it's not well written. And that is a big problem with this ordinance, is people simply didn't understand how to apply it. Now the other thing you could do is make a good faith effort to assign your obligation to provide affordable units to another developer. But that's just a good faith effort. You don't actually have to do anything. You just need to try, all right? That's weak. All right, so what does this all add up to? And that's a Rube Goldberg machine, for anybody who knows what that is. So we have 22 pages of nearly unintelligible policy and procedures, which I had to read through again, and I couldn't believe it, because I hadn't read through it in 5 years. So the whole point of inclusionary zoning ordinances is to streamline the process, save time, right? We ended up with a much more complex process, much less predictability. The one thing developers want is predictability, because they want to know how much is stuff going to cost, how long is it going to take. All right, so they're looking at more time and expense, and then you have an ordinance with a ton of loopholes, right? And this is heartbreaking. This is heartbreaking for those of us who advocated for years for an ordinance, tried to bring in best practices, and were not listened to. And it gets worse. Okay? All right. Okay, so there's a basic concept. Is if you want to sell a condo that's affordable to somebody at 80% median income, right? And you price it. All right, so somebody cannot make more than 80% of median income to buy a condo, but you price it to be affordable to somebody at 80% of median income. Does anybody see a problem with that? All right? To illustrate. An IZ condo sale price is $195,375. By the way, that's affordable. That's an affordable 3-bedroom condo. All right, in some universe other than Madison's, but that's what the actual price was. The maximum income you can make to be eligible is $58,750. The income you have to make in order to be able to afford it is $58,750. Therefore, only households exactly at $58,750 can afford to buy. That's a pretty slim market of buyers. All right? The way we do it in the nonprofit world is if you're selling it to folks at 80% or below, you price it to be affordable to somebody at 65% median, and you have a range to market to. So here they have a little sliver, an impossible sliver to market to. And why the city did that, they did that because the developers were screaming about the allowable sale prices. And so this is how it ended up. But it essentially makes for almost unsellable. And it gets worse. All right, so pricing, right? So Housing is affordable if your housing expense is no more than 30% of your household income, right? So the city calculated for a 3-bedroom condo, it should be affordable to a family of 4 at 80% of median income if at $195,000. All right, so I did my own calculation looking at the 30% figure, but I did it for a condo. I did it for a single family home instead. So, based on my math, a single family home where you don't even have to pay condo dues is affordable to somebody at 80% at $175,000. All right. So what math are they using? So their math is wrong. I mean, it's just okay. All right. Gotta relax. All right. Here's the thing that came up in the last section. How do you protect affordability and fair return to the seller? So, if this is an affordable condo, what happens if they sell? The city has an option to repurchase. All right? And whether the city repurchases or not, if the city doesn't repurchase, the city gets the net proceeds of the sale minus a percentage of the increase in market value, which is kept by the seller. All right? Now, what if that home is held for 20 years and the buyer puts in $40,000 of their own money to fix it up? That's not reflected in any of this. And then the city can use this money that revolves back to them to fund other IZ units, etc. Okay. Now, for a buyer's perspective, what are they looking at? All right, so when I buy my home, how much return investment do I get? All right? Which is the percentage of increase in market value that I keep at the time I sell the home. All right, well, I get 5% of the increase in market value if I keep it for 2 years, 20% 5 years, 35% 8 years, 50% 11, 30% after 15, 50. I mean, if you're a buyer, you have no idea how much you're going to make on this house if you sell it. Now, you never do, because the market goes up and down. But here, somebody was trying to be very fancy and say, all right, we want to set up a situation so we'll incentivize people to live in their home for 11 years and then we want them to move. All right? Which is really manipulative as far as I'm concerned. My organization, you just got 25% of the increase in market value, period. Keep it simple. Here, they got fancy, even though there were no examples of this formula being applied successfully in the United States. But that's a mess. So buyers were scared off because they were confused. And they looked elsewhere for housing. Because, remember that $195,000 3-bedroom condo that was affordable? You could find one's market rate with no restrictions for less than that. So buyers lived there. There were a lot simpler models out there. And so there were 2 projects that nonprofits did under the new IZ ordinance, that the new IZ ordinance applied to. Commonwealth Development did one in collaboration with a for-profit developer. They used their own resale formula, which says that when you sell your home, the person selling gets to keep half of the appreciation in the house. That's a fair formula. Their units sold like hotcakes. Troy Gardens actually was covered under the ordinance, adding complexity without benefit, and our units sold like hotcakes. And then there was the marketing loophole. All right, so if the developer does not get a qualified offer to purchase on a unit within 120 days after they've begun marketing it, they can notify the city and begin to market it to the next higher income range of families, all right? And adjust pricing accordingly. Are we getting the implications of this? All right. In other words, if you don't accept an offer from a qualified buyer within 120 days, you can increase the sale price and make a higher profit. So guess what people did? To illustrate, an IZ condo is priced at $175,000 to be affordable to a household at or below 70% of median income. If it hasn't sold for 120 days, you can increase the price to $195,000 and market it to people at 80% or below. So if you just wait 120 days, you can make an extra $20,000. So what did you see? You saw the most invisible marketing you've ever seen in your life. There was a resistance to accepting offers. Literally, you could not get some developers to accept offers. And we saw the 120-day period expire and prices increased. Aside from those 2 projects that I referenced, I think this happened almost every time. Up a block. The ordinance was amended in 2006 to clean up some of the problems, but not all of them. Real estate market crashed. Really started in 2007. Ordinance was repealed. So after years and years and years of advocating for an inclusionary zoning ordinance, it lasted less than 5 years. And that was tragic, because it did not have to end this way. So where did we go wrong? We weren't collaborative. We didn't work with the folks who were going to be covered by it. We didn't bring in an expert. We didn't do any financial modeling. We gave up on rental. In the name of simplifying the process, we made development much, much more difficult. In other words, we ignored best practices because we knew best, and we didn't. Okay, and I don't know if Iowa City has this arrogance problem that Madison does, but it's just your worst enemy. And in Madison, we will never learn a thing from Milwaukee. And Milwaukee folks hate that, and this was a self-inflicted wound, 100%. All right, so lessons learned. Let's say, no. The next time we do an inclusionary zoning ordinance in Madison, we'll be more collaborative. We'll keep it simple, right? And that's the number one thing about inclusionary zoning ordinances. You want to make them very simple to understand for everybody, for the developer, and for the home buyers, and for the people who are going to rent the apartments. And we did a very terrible job of that. We need to model the cost of compliance and honestly provide incentives that will cover that. Be honest about it. And if the incentives don't cover all of the cost, be honest, right? So, developers need to make a little less profit in order for the better good of the community. That's essentially what we were saying without saying it. We needed to use correct math in setting pricing of the units. And we did. We used incorrect math in selling allowable sale prices. And we need to bring in expertise so we don't have to learn it all the hard way. I mean, there were ordinances that we could have borrowed that would have gotten us 90% of the way there, that had been proven in practice over time. We could have brought in a staff person from the city of Burlington who who developed and implemented the ordinance to help us craft our own. That would have saved us an enormous amount of time and money, and for some reason we didn't do that. And that's the end of my sad story.
Is this a county-wide project, or just the city of Madison, or how did you try to do it?
It was just City of Madison. It was just City. We never could have gotten inclusionary zoning county-wide. There would have been, some of the suburbs might have been supportive, but most of them would have been highly resistant to any kind of an affordable housing requirement.
And that seems like to be an issue in this community is the fact when you drive development to other areas.
You can, but Madison, I mean, we have these 2 big lakes right downtown. And so there's just this desirability about Madison that's not going to go away, even if you impose some additional requirements on developers. And particularly younger folks want to live closer to the city center. So maybe to some extent you'll drive development, but in Madison we see that more on larger scale projects like office campuses, convention centers. Those are the kind of stuff that can tend to get driven outside the city. But residential development developers are still very much willing to build in the city.
But that's where you want community specific then?
No, sure.
Greg, you say that your IZ was repealed in 2009. That's 5 years ago. What's happened in the subsequent 5 years with inclusionary zoning?
It has not been talked about again. What happened is that the real estate market, new development really, outside of the university and state-related buildings, new construction almost entirely evaporated for a few years. And what we've seen is a strong resurgence in rental housing, some tax credit development, but a lot of high-rise downtown rental housing for students and for young computer professionals. And none of which, aside from the tax credit stuff, none of which have any kind of affordability component whatsoever. I think the fear is that developers had gotten so skittish when the market fell apart, we didn't want to put any additional burdens on them. I think at this point, the recovery is robust enough where I think that conversation could start again. But people haven't done this kind of analysis of the ordinance so that they go, oh, IZ just doesn't work here, instead of, oh, yeah, IZ could work, we just did it wrong. So, it's all how you tell the story.
Was there any grassroots effort that was organized so that when the developers asked for all of these exclusions, there was somebody to push back on the other side?
There really wasn't an opportunity for that. There were so many structural